Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dennis Farmer and the host of the Recovery 101 podcast. Full disclosure, today's message is all going to be about Legacy Village, and I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of Legacy Village, a drug and alcohol treatment center that was founded back in 2015 in the Bakersfield area, and over the years evolved into a veterans-only treatment facility. We are now located, and have been for a while, on a 26-acre ranch here on the central coast of California. We treat addiction, substance use disorder, and we're a dual diagnosis facility. Most of our veterans are struggling with another diagnosis like PTSD or anxiety, depression. A lot of our female veterans are struggling with military sexual trauma. So we address all of those concerns. It's a small 12-bed facility. Our entire curriculum has been designed around the veteran population. And we are very proud of the work that we've been able to do there. We average success rates about 3 times the national average. Anywhere from 52 to 68% of our veterans have remained clean and sober at a year. And the national average is pretty bad. It's 2 out of 10. They estimate that 20% of individuals who get care for an addiction actually stay sober and clean at the 1-year mark. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons, I think, that addiction treatment in general is difficult. One of the reasons for our success, I wholeheartedly believe, is just the amount of individualized care that we're able to give. Our veterans see a counselor for one-on-one sessions 4 times a week, 5 times a week. They see a therapist for dual diagnosis conditions 3 to 5 times a week. And that's in addition to the traditional programming stuff that we do. But I mean, that combined with the fact that we've always in the past been able to keep somebody for at least 30 to 45 days, if not 90 days, has allowed us to really build solid foundations. And of course, it's the work the veterans are putting in themselves that makes the difference. But having the time and the resources, the facility that we have that is extremely beautiful and serene, and then having the dedicated men and women who work there and give their time and the individual care that they can give, all of those things make a difference. Still, we know everybody doesn't make it. And there's a lot of misconception that exists out there around addiction and addiction treatment, especially if people don't have personal experience. Either they haven't gone through it or they don't have a loved one or somebody close to them that's gone through it. First of all, you aren't cured from an addiction. Addiction is a chronic relapsing condition, and relapse is often part of the story. I've always explained it this way. It's the best analogy I've ever heard. If somebody is diabetic and winds up with a blood sugar that's sky high through the roof in the danger zone, and they're rushed to the hospital's job is to treat the symptoms, stabilize the patient, and then teach them how to manage the disease moving forward. And once it's under control and the patient has the tools they need, then they're released. And if that diabetic goes out and after a day or two eats an entire package of Oreos and downs it with a chocolate milkshake and their blood sugar spikes again, nobody looks at the hospital like they've done something wrong. And that isn't the case in addiction treatment. A lot of times the industry gets a bad rap because of the relapse factor. And at the end of the day, we can provide tools, we can provide education, we can provide support, and help build that foundation. But it's still incumbent upon the person who's gone through the program to use those tools and practice those tools when they get home. And of course, with our program, it comes with 6 months worth of outpatient. And we're continually following up via phone call and emails and staying connected and wrapped around the veterans, which I think has a lot to do with why our relapse rates have been so much lower. Because that's when the real rubber meets the road, when somebody gets out of the program and goes back into what we call regular life. But anyways, like the analogy with the diabetic, addiction treatment is really kind of the same. Our job is to stabilize the client, give them foundational tools on how to treat and manage the disease. In our case, it takes longer than a couple of days to do that. You're talking about something where people have spent years, if not decades, abdicating some of the most basic responsibilities, from making their bed every day to taking the trash out. I mean, when you're mirrored in the middle of an addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol, regular basic maintenance of life is not something that you take seriously, that's even on your radar. So sometimes we're teaching from the very basic levels of turning the lights off and making your bed and having a routine every day, all the way up through the more intricate, complex details of relationships and wounds and healing from those things. So it takes more than a couple of days. 30, 45 days is really kind of the bare minimum of what it takes to get a foundational level of understanding your addiction, your triggers, and beginning to work with it. Our program is designed to be a 90-day program. And it's designed that way for a reason, because that's a good amount of time to be able to get through some of the traditional obstacles that we see at certain milestones throughout the process. Today's message, though, is not specifically about addiction treatment and Legacy Village per se. I bring that up so that we have some kind of basic background information. But let me give you some history on veterans healthcare, because that's also important to the story. Back in 2014, the Veterans Choice Act was passed, not intended to be a permanent piece of legislation, but it was passed to solve the problem of extended wait times at VA facilities, long drives to get to a facility, not having access to the kind of specialty care that a veteran needed. It served to bridge that gap by allowing veterans to have a choice to go out to a provider, a private provider, and get health care that they needed. And it worked well. And it worked so well that the Mission Act, which was a permanent piece of legislation, was passed in 2016, and by 2018 it had been developed. And so the Mission Act, when it went into place, developed what was called the Community Care Network. And the Community Care Network is a group of in-network providers, privately ran, privately owned providers for all kinds of specialties, not just addiction treatment. Heart specialists, optometrists, there's any kind of really health specialty or healthcare item can be in that Community Care Network. And it is designed for the exact same reason. Specifically, if a veteran has to wait more than 20 to 28 days for an appointment, they can go to a community care provider. If the drive time from the veteran's home to a VA facility exceeds 60 minutes, the veteran can go to a community care provider. If the veteran and their primary care doctor decide it's in their best interest, a veteran can go to a community care provider. And, those were tremendously important tools for our veteran population in order to get timely access to quality health care to meet their needs. We all have seen, especially those of us who are in this world, have seen that, especially for post 9/11 veterans, there is a massive rise in the number of suicides, mental health concerns, addiction concerns that are coming to the forefront. And so, just to give you an idea, when they put choice in the very back in the beginning, more than 2 million veterans in the first 2 years, or almost 25% of the enrolled VA healthcare beneficiaries, started to use the program because of the convenience, the accessibility, the time reduction between when you needed an appointment, when you could get one. And it's only the Community Care Network has only grown since then. And of course, with the Mission Act, it's grown even further, which I suspect is part of the problem I'm going to discuss in a little bit. But with that passage of the Mission Act and the development of the Community Care Network, it opened up options for veterans in the world of addiction treatment, where they did not have to rely solely on Veterans Affairs facilities. So, for example, the Greater Los Angeles Healthcare System, which is who we predominantly deal with, runs a program called the Domiciliary, located in the West Los Angeles campus. And good or bad, I don't know. I've never been through it. I've had hundreds of veterans in one form or another who know about it and have their own opinions on it, but it's not really for me to give my opinion. What I do have to say about the Domiciliary is that it's, on a good day with traffic, 2.5 to 3 hours from where I sit right now on the Central Coast, more on a bad day. And the wait time to get into the Domiciliary can exceed 60 days, 2 months. And so regardless of the quality of the program, the length of time it takes to get into it, the hoops that need to be jumped through to get into it, and the distance from more secluded rural areas like the Central Coast of California, the Central Valley of California, Bakersfield is also in this ballpark. People who need addiction, veterans who need addiction treatment in those areas, if they're forced to go to West Los Angeles, it can be prohibitive. We have worked since 2018, since the Mission Act was passed, we have worked as a community care network provider, and with some hiccups, but relatively few. As a veterans-only facility, it's the only way that we do business. We don't accept referrals from the general public. And all of that really worked fine. We were able to accomplish some amazing work. Hundreds of veterans have gone through the program, and that remained relatively consistent and the same until the first part of 2023. And that's really what I want to talk about today, is what's happened this year, what our veterans are currently facing and struggling with at the moment, and then what can be done about it. So at the beginning of 2023, we began to see at Legacy Village, we began to see a dramatic decrease in the number of referrals that we would get. Up until this point, we had great relationships with local clinics. They're known as CBOCs, community-based outpatient clinics, and other VA clinics that are in Santa Maria, Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County, Kern County. We had relationships with the providers. And so to give you an idea of what used to happen, they would have a veteran who came in and needed help. That primary care provider had decided that they were going to refer them to the community care network, i.e. Legacy Village. They'd give us a call, and our team would get to work. They'd wrap around the veteran. We'd get them admitted to the program, usually the same day, but as quickly as possible. And then we'd wait for the authorization to come from Greater Los Angeles, and that usually took 3 to 5 days. And we knew that we were going to eat those 3 to 5 days. It wasn't going to be reimbursed, but it was a great way to mitigate wait times, to have the system work better. And for those of us in the addiction world, and for those of us who are familiar with it, that window of time that you've got from when somebody says, I'm ready to get help, and when they decide that they're not ready again, can be very small. It can be hours. And so it really is important to get somebody into a treatment program as quickly as possible after they've said that they need help. And so that's how it would work. And the beginning of this year, like I said, we began to see what first started was we had a full house of 12 clients, but only 2 of them had an authorization. All of a sudden, 3 to 5 days had gone by with guys that were coming in, and we weren't getting an authorization. And I don't know if any of you have ever worked trying to deal with a federal government agency. If you haven't, this might surprise you. If you have, you'll understand. It is nearly impossible to get direct answers on anything. And that's sad, because we pay for the government. They work for the taxpayer and for the citizenry, and we should be able to be partners, at least with them, in efforts to do stuff, not adversaries. But again, you know, when this stuff all started to come up, the authorizations weren't coming in, we started making phone calls. We reached out to the VA, to counterparts there, and initially we were told that there were some bad actors in the industry, and because of that, the VA had unilaterally decided to reassess their use of addiction providers in the community. Didn't really make a lot of sense. Community care network providers are administered by a third-party healthcare agency. We're contracted. We are required to maintain licensing and accreditation. We are regularly audited. These are all, it didn't really seem to make a lot of sense that one quote unquote bad actor had disrupted an entire system as if through anybody who was involved with the Greater Los Angeles healthcare system. Just didn't make sense. And so it would take nearly 6 months, 6 months of continual reaching out to the VA, to our congressional representatives. But when we finally started to get some answers that made sense, it came down to this. The VA has made a decision unilaterally that they are going to prioritize admission for addiction treatment to a VA-ran facility. And if they determine that either they can't handle it or the wait list is too long or that certain conditions are met, if they, being the VA, determine that a veteran can use community care, then they will send a referral out. Now, that completely runs afoul of the Mission Act. And they're quoted. They're quoted in an article today in the San Luis Obispo Tribune that came out. Front page of the Tribune covering this story today in San Luis Obispo County. But they're quoted as saying they prioritize the VA facilities. Nowhere in the Mission Act was that the intent, or is it spelled out that gives them a way to do that. The Mission Act was clearly designed to give the veteran choice in their health care, not to give the VA choice in a veteran's health care. And so, look, if you start to look at it, and if you start to take a look at what's happening within the VA as a department, for the last year, you have seen massive hiring blitzes that we're talking thousands and thousands of positions, going to usually major metropolitan areas, Greater Los Angeles, Phoenix, Dallas, places like that. No matter how many professionals you put in those large-scale facilities, it doesn't do a thing to change access to care for somebody who's in Santa Maria, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Bakersfield, Paso Robles. None of those places are impacted by them hiring 4,000 new bodies at the Greater Los Angeles facility. And so, at the end of the day, it comes down to they're breaking the law. But then you have to ask yourself, who's going to make them follow it? We're simply a contracted provider. We're not guaranteed admissions. And so we've got no standing. And so we've got no standing. And so we've used our time and our resources as best we've been able to. I've made 2 trips to Washington, D.C. We have advocated to anybody who'll listen, including congressional representatives. I've got to tell you, one of the things that was eye-opening on my first trip to Washington, D.C., I learned that that's when I learned, anyways, this is a problem nationwide. It's not just happening here. Now, Legacy Village is impacted more than a lot of other places, probably more than any, because we're veterans only. It is our sole source of business. So other facilities who may only treat 1 or 2 veterans irregularly probably aren't noticing a substantial drop in the census because it isn't impacting them the same way that it impacts us. That being said, I did find out in that trip to Washington that this was a national problem and that legislation, H.R. 3520, had been drafted in the House by Iowa Congresswoman Miller Meeks, and that there was a competing bill in the Senate. And so that first trip was in May. So since then, it's really been kind of a personal push of mine to figure out how we can support that legislation and how we can help move this forward, because H.R. 3520 specifically addresses substance use disorder. It basically tells the VA, look, you're wrong. Substance use disorder treatment is part of the Mission Act. It always should have been part of the Mission Act. Little detour here. Anybody who was part of the Mission Act will tell you the same. But that being said, this legislation really solidified that, look, you don't have the right to do what you're doing. I immediately reached out to Congressman Carbajal's office, who is the congressman for the northern part of Santa Barbara County, the southern part of San Luis Obispo County. I reached out to Congressman Panetta's office, who is Paso Robles up into Monterey County, and Congresswoman Brownlee's office. Brownlee sits on the Veteran Affairs Committee, is the congressman for the Ventura area and surrounding areas. And I'll tell you right now, I got crickets out of Congressman Panetta's office. I didn't get a return message from Congresswoman Brownlee's office. To his credit, Congressman Carbajal gave me a sit-down meeting in my second trip back in August to D.C. Sadly, however, I received a message about 3 weeks ago that they were not going to support H.R. 3520, and specifically because it took control out of the VA's hands. And it's frustrating because this is an issue where we're not talking about We're not talking about trying to be supportive of federal employee unions. We're not talking about trying to be supportive of keeping the VA at the forefront of. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about veterans who are in areas nowhere close to a VA-ran facility who need addiction treatment and can't get it. Let me sidetrack for 1 second right now. We've had a long-standing relationship with veterans treatment courts. And there are 2 female veterans that at the 1st of September were both found themselves incarcerated, neither for major crimes, both related to their condition, their diagnosis, their condition, their substance use disorder, and other dual diagnosis conditions. And those 2 female veterans in normal times would have had the opportunity to be released from jail and get help and treatment, which would be far more beneficial, not just to them individually, but to the community as a whole. And a matter of fact, the VA hires what's called a justice officer that works with the courts to try and facilitate these things. In the first week those 2 were incarcerated, the judge had agreed to let both of them go into a treatment program in lieu of being incarcerated. Should have taken a day, maybe 2, to get the requisite paperwork done and the authorizations. Today is October 15th. And as of today, 6 weeks later, both of those veterans remain in county jail. No authorization. As recently as last week, one of those veterans had their consultation canceled and not rescheduled yet. I'm going to get into that here too, because I think that's important for you guys to know. If you're a veteran, just to give you an idea of what this timeline looks like right now. So this is not how things used to work or how it should work. This is how things are working right now. If you're a veteran and you need help, first you've got to call and schedule an appointment with your primary care provider. That can take anywhere from 3 days to 10 days. Then you get in and you see them. You let them know that you've got an addiction problem. They cannot submit a referral for you anymore. That can't be done. But you are scheduled in at that point to see a mental health provider. Now, keep in mind, both the primary care physician and the mental health provider are both more than educated and capable to make necessary assessments in the referrals. They simply aren't allowed to. So you get into the mental health provider appointment. Let's say that's another 10 days down the road. You're 20 days into this, and you're at your second appointment. If you've gone, you've likely, almost certainly, kept using and kept drinking for the last 20 days. If that mental health professional concurs that you need addiction treatment, it's then referred down to Greater Los Angeles. And from there, you wait. You wait for what's called a domiciliary screening. And it's all because they're forcing the prioritization of the VA facility. And that phone call for the screening can take 30 or 60 days on top of how long you've already waited for your primary care appointment and your mental health care appointment. If you don't answer the phone call, you're dropped from the system and you have to start all over again. If you don't answer the questions correctly on the screening, which they don't tell you what's correct and what's not correct, you're dropped. What do I mean by that? There's a question in the screening that says, are you willing to travel to LA to get treatment? Now, some people are just going to instinctively say, no, I don't want to go to LA. If you answer no to that question, you are dropped from the system. You aren't told you're dropped. You just wait for another phone call to come that doesn't come. These aren't anecdotal. I have seen this personally, case after case after case after case. Once that screening's done, let's say you've answered everything the right way, then at some point, when a bed is available, could be months down the road, you'll get a phone call. If you cannot go, for whatever reason, you haven't made your arrangements yet, you're not ready, you're still obviously using, you're not in a state of readiness or willingness. If you say no to that bed, you're dropped from the system. You're not moved further down the waiting list. They don't check back with you. And nobody from the VA at any point, other than your touch points with these appointments, nobody is following up with these guys daily or at least weekly to see how the hell they're doing. That's what's happening right now. Right now, while I've got 12 empty treatment beds, fully licensed, accredited with the highest accreditation you can get, in contract with the VA, Empty. There are 100 people on a wait list right now to get into the VA facility down south in West LA. That's not counting the hundreds of other veterans, of course, across the course of a year that simply give up on getting the help that they need because jumping through these hoops is not exactly something that an individual slamming heroin 3 times a day is very keen on doing. I can tell you from my own personal experience that there's only so many brick walls you hit before I was back in a bottle. And that's where we find ourselves, with an absolute inability to react to these situations, give treatment to the veterans in a way that is meaningful and beneficial for what they need. Like I said, that window can be incredibly small to get help. And we're not even, the VA isn't even pretending that it's going to be a small window. They're asking somebody with an addiction problem, somebody who's shooting up heroin twice a day, somebody who's drinking a fifth or 2/5 a day of booze, somebody who's hooked on benzodiazepines, somebody who's doing meth. They're asking these people not only to jump through all of these hoops, but to somehow navigate life for the next 3 months before they're going to get a bed. And we're supposed to think that that's okay. As a society and as somebody who supports veterans, I don't think that's okay. I cannot see the logic in it. I cannot see the humanity in it. We have had homeless veterans. Matter of fact, 40% of the veterans who have gone through Legacy Village this year were homeless when they came to us. 100% of them remain sober today, and 100% of them remain housed. And so you take a homeless veteran who may or may not have a phone, who is in the middle of a heroin addiction, and you're expecting them to jump through these hoops. All the while, you've got no infrastructure in place. The VA has no infrastructure to follow up with these guys, to call them. Have somebody pick up the phone and call them and see how they're doing today. Yeah, we can't take you in. We know we can't take you in, but we wanted to reach out and touch you and let you know that we're still working. If we have a situation where we're not able to take a veteran in at Legacy Village, somebody talks to that veteran twice a day, every day, until we get him into a bed. That's not something we get paid for. It's the right thing to do. And we don't see any of that stuff happening out of the VA. Matter of fact, they will, even though it's incorrect, they will tout to you that their waiting period for a bed is only 28.3 days. Now, one, that's nothing to be proud of. It's abysmal. But it's not even truthful. That 28.3 days is their average wait time after the veteran has had a DOM screening. And if you remember what I said earlier, they've gone through a primary care appointment. They've gone through a mental health appointment. They've waited, they don't know how long, for a DOM screening. Then the clock starts. But the VA's public stance is that their wait time is only 28.3 days. Again, it's a terrible wait time to begin with, but they're lying to you. They're lying to the public. They're lying to members of Congress. And they find this acceptable. It is amazing to me that we have allowed any part of a government that is supposed to work for us to get so big and so brazen that they will actively flaunt the law, that they will take and ignore the rule of law at the detriment of veterans, and nobody's doing anything about it. Congressman Carbajal, where are you? Why right now are there 8 veterans in your district who need addiction treatment but are sitting in their apartment drunk? They're sitting in a jail cell right now. They're on the streets still using right this moment. Why don't they have a bed when they want one? Congressman Panetta, 2 veterans in your district that we know of. Congresswoman Brownlee, I would no doubt imagine, given the size of your district, the same problem exists there. I'm almost certain of that because I have talked to other providers, veterans organizations, and legislators across the country, and this problem exists everywhere. It's disgraceful. Yet the Department of Veteran Affairs won't even return our phone calls. So today, that's where we stand. We have an empty facility, our employees are off work, and we are struggling. But we are not giving up the fight. We're not giving up the fight because I remember what it was like when I hit brick wall after brick wall trying to get my own sobriety. We're not giving up the fight because we know how diligently the veterans we're in touch with are trying to do the right thing and jump through the hoops that they need to jump through. We're not quitting because it's the right thing to do to fight this battle. Despite how difficult it is, I have faith. I have faith. That's a good way to end it. I know that this is a righteous cause, and even if Legacy Village doesn't survive it, it's still the right fight to have. Men and women who signed up voluntarily to serve this country, put their lives on the line, many of whom were deployed more than once. Those men and women deserve not just our respect, not just our thanks. They deserve the best damn health care we can give them, and they sure as hell don't deserve to be treated the way they're being treated right now across this country and by the greater Los Angeles healthcare system. If you'd like to learn more about what's going on, we have some of the local media stories that have been published on our Facebook page. You can look for Legacy Village on Facebook. You can visit our website at www.legacyvillage.com. And we just encourage everybody out there listening, whoever this message happens to reach, call your congressperson, call your legislators, call the VA, call the newspaper, call the television station, call anybody who'll listen, and let them know that right now, veterans who need help for an addiction, veterans who need residential treatment for whatever battle they're fighting right now, simply aren't getting it. I want to end with this one question, just something for us to think about, because it's a number that the VA doesn't track. How many of our veterans have gone out, scheduled that first appointment, even gone to that first appointment, and then their addiction took hold and they never went to another? That number is not tracked. We've got no idea the true magnitude of how bad this problem is. It's hard enough for the layperson to go out and ask for help. But you take somebody who was a warrior, somebody who signed up and served their country, it is extremely difficult for them to admit they've got a problem to begin with. It is even more difficult for them to become willing to get help for it. And to be treated this way when they do ask for help is inexcusable. I hope you guys learned something during this message today. I hope you'll go out and you'll advocate for our veterans, and you'll help to affect some positive change on this. If we don't do it, it's clear that our government and that the Department of Veteran Affairs isn't going to.